Okay, to kick off this explainer, I want you to completely rethink your definition of a word we use literally all the time. The word is rules. Or, more specifically, if we're talking in a spiritual context, precepts. You know, most of us hear the word rules and we instantly think of these restrictive boundaries, right? Things we're explicitly told not to do, usually backed up by some threat of punishment. But today we are diving into an incredibly ancient, completely paradigm-shifting philosophy from a text known as the Brahmanit Sutra. We're going to explore how this text takes the concept of filial piety, which most people just think of as family duty, and frames it as the absolute foundation of all moral precepts. And even better, we'll look at exactly how this sweeping, massive philosophy is meant to be put into practice in our actual everyday lives.
So there's this really fascinating recurring quote right in the source material that anchors this whole idea. It goes, "Filial piety towards parents, teachers, and the three jewels. Filial piety is named precepts." In this framework, avoiding evil, it is not about dodging bad karma. It's not about escaping some sort of cosmic punishment. Instead, it's entirely about actively honoring our parents and the people who guide us. The text is basically suggesting that the very essence of a moral rule, restraining yourself from doing harm, is essentially just an act of deep, abiding respect.
Let's break down the logic here, because it's super interesting. Traditionally, filial piety is just seen as obedience, right? Doing what your mom and dad tell you. But the text totally redefines it. It argues that restraining yourself from doing evil is actually the ultimate way to avoid bringing shame to your parents. And on the flip side, actively doing good is the absolute best way to honor the people who gave you life. If you really think about it, behaving with kindness and integrity is the greatest possible tribute you can pay to your family name. The argument here is that if you are genuinely filial, you naturally just won't commit bad deeds. So you end up perfectly embodying all the precepts without ever needing some rigid checklist of rules.
And this is right where the philosophy takes a massive, expansive leap. Normally, we hold a pretty secular view of family. It's just your current parents, your siblings, your relatives, the nuclear family. But this ancient text completely shatters those boundaries to introduce what's called the Bodhisattva view. This perspective factors in the concept of endless rebirths across the 6 realms of existence. So, in this much broader cosmic view, your family isn't just who's sitting across from you at the dinner table today. It encompasses literally every single living being.
Which brings us to a really profound and honestly quite radical concept presented in the text. All men are my fathers. All women are my mothers. To kill and eat them is to kill my own parents. See, because this philosophy is built on the belief in countless past lives, it asserts that you've been born over and over and over again. Statistically speaking, then, every single being you encounter has at some point been your mother or your father. The text uses this mind-bending logic to extend empathy to absolutely every living creature, and that forms the very foundation for its strict stance on nonviolence and vegetarianism.
So, the huge takeaway here? Universal compassion is basically just filial piety scaled up to a cosmic level. To harm any living being is to harm your own family. To rescue any living being, whether that's a stray animal in danger or a person in distress, is quite literally saving your own parents. The rules about not doing harm aren't just arbitrary restrictions anymore, they're natural expressions of a vast universal family bond. But okay, how does a person actually live like this on a random Tuesday morning? Let's transition from the high-level philosophy to the highly practical.
Daily implementation, turning philosophy into action.
When looking at how this translates into everyday actions, the text zeroes in on a really surprising number, 1. In the source material, there's this concept called the 8 fields of merit, which are basically 8 areas where you can do good deeds to generate positive spiritual outcomes. Now, you'd probably think that worshiping the Buddha or honoring ancient saints would be number 1, right? Actually, no. Out of all 8 fields, the text explicitly ranks caring for the sick as the absolute, undisputed number 1 priority.
So why is that? Well, the text explains that caring for the sick is the ultimate intersection of reverence and compassion. The Buddha himself told his followers to care for the ill, which makes doing so an act of deep reverence. But more than that, a sick person is the single most vulnerable member of our universal family. They need hands-on, deeply empathetic care. I actually want you to reflect for a second on how you treat the vulnerable or sick people in your own life. According to this text, ignoring a sick person when you actually have the capacity to help them isn't just rude. It's a severe, fundamental breach of this entire cosmic family code.
So practically speaking, what are the actual do's and don'ts of daily life when you view everyone as your literal family? Well, in the area of life and nature, the text says you should actively rescue and release living beings. On the flip side, it strictly forbids keeping weapons, hunting nets, or really doing anything that harms animals. And when it comes to conflict, the instruction is to show compassion to your adversaries. No harboring anger, no striking back, and definitely no seeking revenge. It's a complete top-to-bottom rewiring of how we interact with the world around us.
I want to zoom in on that last point about conflict for a minute, because the text takes a remarkably radical stance on nonviolence. It explicitly lays out, do not answer anger with anger. Do not answer violence with violence. And incredibly, it says that even if your own parents or close relatives are killed, you must not seek revenge. No retaliation, period. The logic is just fascinating. If you kill to avenge a killing, you are ultimately just harming someone else's family member. You're just perpetuating the suffering and completely destroying the universe's natural harmony. True filial piety, in this view, means refusing to add even a single drop of violence to the cosmic ecosystem. It's about breaking that cycle of revenge entirely.
To tie this whole narrative together, the text reveals that these aren't just rules for the sake of having rules. The ultimate goal of this massive perspective shift is actually a return to our pure original nature. When you truly, deeply internalize that every single being is your family, the precepts totally cease to be these rigid restrictions you have to force yourself to follow. Instead, they just become effortless, natural expressions of universal love. You don't steal, you don't kill, and you don't harm, simply because you wouldn't ever do those things to your own beloved mother or father.
It is honestly a breathtaking way to view the world. It completely transforms mundane rules of discipline into this active, breathing practice of boundless empathy. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to carry with you. If every single being you meet today, your coworker, the person driving terribly in front of you, the stray animal on the street, was actually your parent in a past life, how would your very next interaction change? Keep that in mind as you go about your day.